Okay, I've got Faye Whyte with me today. Faye is, how do I introduce you? A longtime dialogue doctor, fanatic, community member, awesome writer. You were on episode 50 where we looked at your plot,
Yes,
and
yes.
then you were on a bunch of the like community episodes. So if people want to go look at at what you've done before, because you were on the two of the book clubs, right?
I think one
Go.
and Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah. Yeah. So
That one was
you
fun.
people know you. You've been around. We don't
Yeah.
need to get into more of that. Let's just talk about your piece. Okay. So
Okay.
you sent me this amazing piece um, that I really struggled to find anything to say about because it's really good.
Oh, well,
So
thank you.
again, I'm just like, yeah, I was just nitpicking. I was like, well, I'm just gonna pick at it a little bit, but it's fantastic. So how'd you feel about it?
It was a big step outside my comfort zone because and the whole background behind this scene in particular is that from some of our work before, you didn't like Victor
Yeah, I didn't like Victor.
and you thought he was boring
Yeah,
and he was too perfect.
yeah.
So I tried to lean really, really hard into that and
I like him
make
in
it
this scene.
okay, good, good. Well then my work here is done.
So what were you going for with Victor in this
Um,
scene?
so what I did was I did some character work, and basically Victor is the kind of person who wants to always solve problems. He
Nice.
wants to he wants to find out, like dissect things and then
Hmm.
put them back in the right order.
Yeah.
And so he wants to figure her out. And this is their first meeting. And it's like at the very first meeting, he's like, no, I'm figuring you out now.
Nice.
Like, we don't need to get to know each other. We're just going to, you know, solve the puzzle.
Yeah. And part of what I love about that is there's kind of a sinisterness to it, which is, I don't know if that was intentional, but that it
Nope.
brings a really nice texture to his character. Yeah.
Well, good,
Yeah.
good.
Um, yeah. So this is their first meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And I didn't want to call it a meet cute because I didn't want anything to be cute about
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I struggle with that term sometimes too.
it.
Yeah. It's just their introductory scene. But yeah, so it is a mute cute though. It's an interesting one though, because let's just go through the beats real quick before we talk about it. You've got her walking her dog Carlisle. Ruth is walking her dog Carlisle. She sees a man in the woods. They approach each other. He has dog treats all ready to kind of intercept her, which is part of the sinister, like, hey, why are you prepared? Um, she tries to get away, but the dog kind of holds her there. So they have a conversation. Then the dog runs off and he tricks her, doesn't trick her, but kind of, you know, manipulates her into using her powers. When she does, she knocks him on his ass, which is great. And then they head back to the uh, facility together. Um, and then meet cute kind of comes to an end. He kind of hints to some future stuff, and the meet cute comes to an end. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that I'm like scrolling it, and I have so few notes. Those who watch this all the time are like, Jeff has no notes, because it's really freaking good. So yeah, I liked the plot point. Talk to me about, before I get into my thoughts. Talk to me about how you wrote it. And
um,
I'm asking that, Faye, because I've read your stuff before,
mhm.
and your stuff before you're a good writer, but this was a kind of a step up for you from what I've read. So talk to me about how you got here.
So I started with I wanted them to meet, and I wanted him to be a more interesting character, so not just like this dude.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to try and keep twisting things. So like and so every time I wanted a twist, I tried to make one of the characters do something that was a little unexpected or
Nice.
and
Nice.
that was sort of how I went into it.
Yeah, including the dog, which I think is great.
Oh yeah, you gotta have a dog.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk. There are a couple things that there's some things I want to point out you're doing that I really like, and then there are a couple things that I want to talk about that I think you just need to clean up a little bit. They're not like like rewrites. It's literally just like put this sentence here. So the first one here, when you're imagining this in your book, what chapter is this?
Oh, it's like about a third of the way in.
Okay. So a lot of times we'll do this, because you write like I write, well, because you and I write in the same way, we'll do this thing because you're not writing like I write, we just write in the same pattern. We're writing, in essence, each chapter as a short story because we're sitting down, we're writing the whole scene. We write the first of the scene, we write to the end of the scene, we get our like conflict, choices, and consequence in, and then we put it down, we go about our day job, and then we come back and we write another scene. Something we need to be kind of hyper aware of when we start putting all those scenes into a novel is the transition from one chapter to the next, so that it doesn't feel like a collection of short stories. This line you have here, so you start off with the cuff off. Ruth felt like she spent all of her energy ignoring the cacophony of voices and the conversation clashing in her head. When she escaped with the dog into the quiet shade of the wood, the noise faded away and she could finally stretch and relax. This kind of like, that's a really well-written paragraph, but this kind of summary opening here makes it feel like, oh, I'm starting a new story. And so we just need to make sure when you start putting these together into a book, I always read the end of every last chapter and the first of the next chapter to make sure there's a smooth flow, because we don't want to give the reader permission to put the book down. So when they get to the end of the chapter, we want them moving into the next chapter in this very like smooth and fluid way. So it may work, but because this is kind of this like recapping summary type paragraph, like now we're in the woods and she feels better with her cuff off. This is the kind of thing that we'll write for us to ramp ourselves into a scene, and you may not need it when you go to the full book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah,
just a tiny thing. And just to make sure we're taking that extra step, because I write this way, I'll also edit this way, where I'll like edit a chapter and then I'll go back to work, and just taking that step to be like, okay, I gotta edit chapter to chapter.
Paying more attention to the transitions.
Okay. I love that she's talking. So this is you have your main character walking alone in the woods with her dog, right? Well, she's not alone, she's with her dog, but the dog doesn't talk. So you could have had, potentially there's 7, 8 paragraphs here before Victor enters the scene. So you could have had just 7 paragraphs of her like reflecting and thinking. I love that you're getting her voice in here so early, because it makes it super relatable.
I may or may not have been listening to previous podcasts where you mentioned that.
Well, I'm just going to give you credit for it because I love it.
Okay, thanks.
So you've got here, Carlisle stopped, sniffed at the base of the tree and cocked his leg to release a few dribbles of urine. I'm so glad I can't hear what's going on inside your head, my friend. So like by pulling her voice in here, just talking to her dog, we start to kind of get her like emotional tone a little bit and where she's at emotionally, which is nice. And just hearing her makes the moment relatable. And, you've done it in a way that's realistic as well, which is a nice bonus. Like I was walking my dog today and this morning and talking to him in the same way that I was a little meaner. I was like, will you just go pee? But it was raining and he was taking his good time. Anyway, that's not important for this. But so, yeah, I love that you got the voice in here really early. It's really good. Her talking to the dog. we do, and this is something I wanted to bring up to you. There is a spatial problem in the story. So she's looking at these, like, what she thinks are fireflies in the distance. And then she tells the dog that she wants to head back. And it says, when she sensed the flash along the edge of the tree line, she wondered if it could be a firefly, but it was too early in the season. Maybe it was just her imagination. As they approached, the light grew steady. And then you have the man stood quietly in the undergrowth, his curiosity giving the surrounding air of energetic glow. We need one more sentence before this.
Okay.
We need her to like notice the man. We need her to like need to squint to make out what the light like, or the light needs to gather into a man. Like we need a prelude to that spatially, and to just walk us through the step of it. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep.
So you've got it here too. You keep going, you go, the dog stopped, stiffened, and looked at the same location. His nose sniffed up in the air. She put her hand on his head. She let the soft fur curl around her fingers. It's okay, boy. He'll come out and introduce himself soon. And then then the man speaks. How long have you known I was here? So he doesn't ever come out to introduce himself. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
We need like him approaching.
Okay.
We at least need to know his distance from her.
Okay.
Because now we move from him like hiding in the bushes to all of a sudden he's like standing next to her. And they're talking. So we need that step of him coming out.
Sure.
It would be a good time to introduce what he looks like, because you don't actually, which I love that you do this, you don't actually give us a depiction of him that's like, this is what he looked like as he approaches. Describing his appearance would be a good thing.
Okay.
Here. Or are they talking from afar? Like, how do you imagine this moment?
It's dusk, so she can't see him very well anyways.
Okay.
But they'd be maybe 10-15 feet apart, like far enough that you couldn't clearly see them.
Okay.
She can sense him.
So that's the paragraph I need here.
Okay.
The like, she's strained in the light of dusk to, make out his features.
Okay.
As he walked closer. Like it literally just like 2-3 sentences will do it. Yeah. So yeah, I love this line too. So he says, how long have you known I was here? He had a soft, deep voice. She couldn't place the accent. You lit up like a neon sign. He stepped out of the woods ahead, smiling like they were friends. Has Jerry tried to measure it? Measure what? How far you can detect someone? We should ask him to work with you. So I love that you took this note about her power and how far she can detect him, and you put it in dialogue, because this is one of those common places where we as writers are going to add like 3 paragraphs describing how her powers are like burgeoning and becoming, and she wonders internally how far she can see, and she can tell that it's growing. And right, like we'll write, like, I know I'm guilty of it, we'll write like 4 paragraphs here about like her internal feelings about her own powers, but you got it done in 3 lines with dialogue. It's really fantastic world building that you've like just dropped in here in this really strong way. So really nice job. This is another one of those spatial places where we're missing her distance, right? Like, yeah. I came to introduce myself, Ruth. You're one of the travailers. He waited quietly for her to approach. And I was like, is she approaching? Like, what? Like, what's happening here? Like, so again, just that spatial place where we can, because we're trying to imagine the scene as we're reading it. And your voices are so strong that I can hear. The problem you have is that your voices are so great and the like dialogue is so good that now I really want to be immersed in it. And so I need to know where everybody's standing. Okay. And I don't need a ton. I just need like a line here or there that tells me how they're moving and how they're dancing in juxtaposition with each other. Okay. Yeah. You then bring back the dog, which is fantastic, because it's going to sound weird, but this is a big cast scene. It feels like a conversation between two people, but because the dog's there and you've introduced him as a character, you actually have three distinct voices going on here, which is great. Yeah, I really and so I love that you brought him back, and that you didn't lose him, but you're taking away things that I typically note, which again makes it hard for me to edit your piece. I'm just gonna keep complaining
Sorry.
about sending me something that's so good. Because it's all about me and how many notes I can put on the page. Yeah, so and again here, oh, so this is me nitpicking. This isn't again here. This is me nitpicking. You've got this again strong paragraph where let's back up 2 lines. I like to think so. Ruth brushed past the stranger and tugged on the leash. Let's go, boy. No time to visit a little? This man, smiling treat bringer, was too comfortable, too nice. He definitely wasn't to be trusted, right? So we have this inner thought that she's having, which is great. Just hurrying back for the meeting, so I can satisfy your curiosity. As a reader, because we've noted the man and Ruth has actually had an inner thought here, I was unclear as to which one is speaking. So we just want to drop in there a little dialogue tag, like she said, as she pulled on Carlisle's leash again, right? Like just to like give us the cue of like, this is her inner thought and her dialogue. Because with that inner thought, you're kind of breaking the like Ruth Carlisle, Ruth Victor, Ruth Victor, Ruth Victor. Then you have Ruth, and then you have Ruth again. So just let me know that like, hey, I broke the pattern here.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and so here again is another one of those spatial places, right? She pulls on Carlisle's leash. We're simply here to help. Huh? I thought you were here to fix us. Don't you want to explore your skills, learn how to use them to the fullest advantage? Something about advantage made her stop quickly. The dog was yanked backwards and the man almost ran into her. So now I realize that he's actually chasing her, like following after her. If you put that up here, we're simply here to help, he said as he walked behind her, right? Like maybe even note that he's a little too close for her comfort. So maybe she speeds up a little bit. But now if I visualize that this line is coming from behind her, this moment has a little more menacing feeling of him like not letting her leave.
Okay.
Which adds to that, like, who is this guy? What is this tension going on? And so then when they bump into each other, it relieves the tension in a nice way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if we build the tension more with his like note of like, hey, I'm following you, and then they bump into each other, it's like, okay, he's not going to kill her, like he's not going to stab her. But yeah, so just I mean, I'm a thriller writer, that's where I always go. He's following her, he's going to stab her, he's going to throw her body in the woods. Yeah, so yeah, anyway, just adding that line in here a little bit to give us that spatial awareness so that this bump pays off in the end. Yeah, again, like, not again, I keep saying again, but that's just because I'm like, I don't have anything to say to the phase piece, which isn't totally true. This is again just me nitpicking, right? Like statistics, figures, Ruth scoffed. You knew him. They're talking about a kid that's disappeared. You knew him. I know him. Or know him. I know him. Oh, I butchered that line. Know him. I know him. And then originally you had body language as a dialogue tag. After that, know him, I know him. So know him, I know him. Her jaw tightened as she spoke. Because this is happening as she spoke, give it to us before she speaks.
Okay.
So that we can feel that with you, right? Like bring us into her jaw tightening before he talks so that we can like, we can fully visualize what's happening in that second. Yeah. And then I love how you use the dialogue here, the dialogue tag here, where you break this. He's got two things he says. He says, so this is personal for you. And then he says, that's hard, right? If you would put that together, it's going to have a different feel than the way you wrote it. So if it said, so this is personal for you, that's hard. He leaned forward, forehead creased, and in that damned head tilted expression, little Orphan Ruth had grown up recognizing and hating, right? That feels less impactful. But when you move this dialogue tag in between the two statements here, you're creating that natural rhythm in his speech that emphasizes the last part of what he said. So this is personal for you. He leaned forward, forehead creased in the damn head tilted expression, little Orphan Ruth had grown up recognizing and hating. That's hard, right? Like you can feel now when we read that that's hard, that it like lands really heavy because you've given us that like head motion between the two sentences. It's really nicely done, Faye.
Oh, thanks.
I was impressed. Again, here we need the spatial awareness, right? Ruth flipped up her middle finger. How's this for body language? Let us know that she's like walking backwards, right? Like Ruth flipped up her middle finger as she began to walk away again, right? Like let us know she's creating distance. And then let us know that he's calling after her, right? Because it creates that sense, these lines, how's this for body language? We're still going to have to get to know one another. These lines ring differently if they're standing face to face than if she's like walking away. Because the body language here of her walking away is part of her communication, and that like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. So it makes the line sound different when she has her body turned and is moving away from him than when she's facing him and talking directly to him. And so down here, you have her like in this line here, you wrote that she has to stop because she's picking up poop. If there's poop later in the chapter, we have to see it occur at the beginning. I'm just kidding. Sorry, that's the gun reference.
Yeah.
There's a gun in the first scene.
Okay, yeah, the dog has to poop.
Shot.
Okay.
If you're picking up poop later, I better see the dog poop before.
Okay, gotcha.
But again, it's just that spatial awareness because the like dance that they're doing with each other, where they're like moving back and forth, and he's following her, and she's moving, and she's following her, and she's moving. We need the like positioning of the two people. I think this is the last time I note that spatial awareness. So any questions about that or anything?
No, and that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that I hadn't thought about going through and doing a run through of that, because it's such an intense, like physical scene that, well, I mean, just the movement between them is important.
And it's weird. Like you're writing superhero action, which is always dialogue driven, right? Like even the Marvel movies that are like visual spectacles are dialogue driven, right? Like it's the conversations between the characters that make those movies land. And so you've got this great meet not cute between these two characters, in the dialogue, but what we're missing is the tension being raised by how the characters are positioning themselves against each other and what they're communicating with that body language. His pursuit of her constant moving back, his stepping back forward, her like pushing away, and then her like falling, all needs to be clear because it communicates kind of how she feels. It's not just about helping me visualize, it's communicating how she feels in this moment. Especially since she's got this rough exterior that like she doesn't verbalize her feelings, right? Like feelings are coming out here through body language. She doesn't like tell him like, fuck off. She says like, she flips a middle finger at him, right? Like, so it's the body, as she says like, how's this for body language? Like as she's communicating her feelings, it's with her body. So understanding her positioning is really key in this scene. You then write this whole page, Faye, that is just fantastic. It's really great. And it's just this back and forth where they're talking about the dog. But then they start talking about he's trying to get her. She realizes that he's trying to trick her into using her powers by helping her up from the ground. And it's just a great, like, I'm just going to read a part of it so people can understand what I'm talking about. He squatted in front of her, palm open extended. We both know this might hurt me a bit more than you, but okay, I understand. You'd rather wait until we're in a bunker being watched by Trudy and having our vitals recorded by Jerry, and you're just trying to freak me out. I won't look into you at all. I promise. I'll let you in. Which at this point, because he's been following her, I totally don't trust that line. Pick one thing. My name. What's my name? I don't know how. Do you want to help Nathan? Nate. Do you think Trudy's going to let you go looking for Nate before you can control your powers? Right? Like this whole like interchanging of topics and back and forth and the manipulation he's doing, like using Nate to get her to do what he wants. It's just a really fantastic scene. You did a really good job with it.
Thank you.
I love it. This is a funny thing that's stylistic. I put this note in and it's stylistic, and I don't know if you want to keep it or not. Part of this is just me being hypersensitive because I do leave typos in manuscripts at times.
Okay.
And I get dinged. I'll have readers send me emails that are like, hey, that third paragraph on the 14th page, you used the wrong version of 2. Which I'm always super appreciative for, because in this age we can just go change it. So I was like, thank you. But sometimes I write things that I think are like stylistic, and then I get like, hey, you have a word that shouldn't be there. It's just like, no, it's supposed to be there. So you had that here. Originally you had its period. I can't do it. Ruth leaned back, trying to release her grip, and but he yanked her to her feet and leaned into the contact. So I just added the word just to communicate to the reader, like, no, this isn't a typo. This is on purpose. Like, it's just,
She's stammering. Okay.
Yeah, just to get that stammer in a little bit.
Okay.
Again, it's just a stylistic thing. You could also do the same thing with an M dash. If you just like, instead of the period, you just use the M dash. That lets them know, like, hey, I meant to do this. Yeah. Anyway, and I think that's all I had. Oh yeah, here you at the end, you're like ramping toward the end, which is great. It's fantastic. And then right on page 6, we get our first summary line. I was like, Faye, we almost got all the way through with no summaries. On the walk back, she tried to brush the leaves off and gunk off of her clothes as best she could. She shook her head when Victor offered her his jacket. No, you got to show me. You can't tell me that. He needs to be like, do you want my jacket? And she needs to be like, no. And he needs to be like, you're so stubborn. And she needs to be like, you don't know me. And then like keep walking or something like that. But like, I need to see that interaction. You showed me every interaction so far, down to him like petting her dog. You can't take this one away from me. And then this is a great thing to put in her mouth, right? Like, she'd rather let the chill settle on her shoulders, use it as a distraction. So that's a great thing to be like, I'd rather freeze to death, right? Like, that's a great line to put in her mouth. Yeah, so I want, the only last thing I'd say is, you've written this beautiful piece. You have these 2 very strong voices. You've got really great tension in your meet non-cute. You've got really good, like the twists, like you said at the beginning, are there. Things are happening unexpectedly that you're forcing Ruth to respond to. And Victor is not this like bland, perfect person, he's got this like, I'm not sure if he's here to help or hurt. Right. I don't really know what his motivations are. So you've got this really great meetup. Um, and you've built Ruth in this scene to be this, the character I know you want her to be, which is this very strong future leader who's struggling to find herself. You got to give her the last word. You got to give her the last word, because he says some isolated flashes of he says, I don't have it completely figured out yet. I think it requires a trigger of some intense emotional upheaval. Some of the isolated flashes in his memory made more sense now. He looked at her, his brow furrowed. Who did you see? Your brother, Ian, and Stacy. Wait a minute. How much did you? Cuts off. Ruth left him landing. I need her to like say something, right? Like Ruth left him on the landing, headed downstairs, leaving the door behind her. Served him right. Right? Like I need her to like cut him off, because he's getting cut off. Right? Like you've got him like trailing off here. Let her say something to actually like end the conversation. Mostly because you've got this very strong opinionated character here. So like, let her in those scenes. Let her speak last. To give that feeling of control, especially in this scene where they're battling back and forth for control, and she ends up winning this engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like winning this engagement. So by taking these memories that he wasn't ready for her to have, she's supposed to just be looking for his name in his mind, and she takes these things that he's not. So it ends up being this kind of like, yeah, I'm a badass kind of ending. So you got to give her that like, yeah, I'm a badass kind of vocalization, so that we can celebrate with her here at the end. Like, yeah, you get to stand on the landing and stammer while I have the cool line and walk into the building. Right? Like you need the cool line to walk into the building. Yeah. So those were all my notes. Anything else you want to talk about in the piece?
No, that was incredible, and you've given me lots to think about.
I don't think so. I think I just like picked at stuff because it's so good. Yeah.
So, well, I mean, getting ready for it was that like, so this is like, I just drafted this 2 days before I sent it to you, because
now I'm mad.
But
you're not allowed to write something that good, Faye, in a freaking first draft.
So, but I've been thinking about it, because and the aim was to work on his character to make him give him more depth. That was the whole.
Well, mission accomplished. You did a good job.
Oh, thanks.
There is a question of like, how do you so part of what's giving him depth is the mystery of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle you're going to have moving forward with his voice is, once we know who he is, how do you maintain the mystery of motivation? And so you're going to have some scenes where he just downright feels sinister, where you're not sure what he's after. You've given him this, like, if I were to describe his voice here, he, when we talk about the topics and the language he uses, he's focused on the person he's talking to. He keeps the conversation on Ruth, right? Like he doesn't allow it to come to himself. He keeps pushing it toward her and what she's doing. And he makes these like complimentary statements. He says nice things and soothing things. So that's part of his voice, right? Or is like keeping the topics focused on her, saying these nice and soothing things. It's in where it becomes menacing and creepy is in his body language, where he's following her and he's getting too close to her, right? Like he's getting closer than she wants him to be, and he's surprising her. So if you keep those three things, of, with his body language, him continually doing things to people that makes them physically uncomfortable. And you hold that in this juxtaposition of him also complimenting them, it's going to create this very weirdly edgy thing. Because what creates that edge in his voice is that dichotomy of like, he's being very nice. He's got treats for her dog. He's like saying great. He's trying to meet her. He's telling her that I'm meeting you because I want to see you before like we talk. But then on this side, he's like, she's asking him to leave and he's not. And so that's where the change starts to build that tension. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So doing that with his voice, you could see him in a meeting where they're all like standing around talking about something, and something he doesn't like somebody saying, you can see him physically moving closer to that person. And not in a threatening way, just like coming around the table to stand behind them. Right. Like that kind of, but that kind of physical menacing, I would keep as part of his voice, because it gives him that, like, as we talked about when we talked about your plot, that like broken edge to him of like, he's a commander, he's in charge, he's leading, but there's this kind of like broken side. It very much gives him that like broken menacing side by creating that discrepancy in his voice. His pacing is interesting too. He likes to play with people, and well, that's the sense you get from this scene.
Okay.
He's not in a hurry to get to things. He's not in a hurry with her here either. I would keep that in his voice, because it also adds to the menacing of like, I'm uncomfortable and I don't want to be in this moment, but he's just hanging out here. And it, like, there's almost in the scene as you wrote it, there's almost an amusement in her like trying to get away from him. And that's what's giving him the edge, is that like, if you were writing him as the perfect gentleman and she was like, all right, I'll see you back at the building, he'd be like, okay, I just wanted to introduce myself, see you later.
Yeah.
Right. He wouldn't stroll behind her as like, she's like, and that's where the like, living in this moment, when she talks about like, I knew him, his like, again, the pacing that you created in that line where he's like, that's hard. After he gives this kind of like tilt, it's the tilt of his head and the like slowing down to live in this moment that he knows is hard for her. Right. Like that's where the menacing is coming in his voice. It leaves that kind of, that just by creating the aspects of his voice where like you're creating these discrepancies within his dialogue daisy, within his like words, body language, cadence, and pacing, where his words seem nice, but his body language and pacing feel off. That it creates that tension.
So the contrast is what gives him the interest.
The contrast is what gives him the interest. If you give him, if she says leave and he leaves, and his body language is giving her personal space, he's PETA from the Hunger Games. Yeah. And he's, oh, look at nice PETA, right? Like, especially from the first book in the Hunger Games, he's the like, I just want to help you. It's happy to be here. But because you've given him that like aggressive body language matched with a friendly tone, our like internal warning sensors are like, wait a second.
What's wrong with this guy?
Yeah, this isn't okay. Like, this isn't all right. If you had given him aggressive language, like let's say that he had shown up and been like, I'm Victor, I'm here to train you, I'm in charge. And she'd be like, great, let's talk at the facility. And then he followed behind her and he's like, we need to test your powers out here in the woods where nobody sees anything, right? Like, then we're like, okay, this guy's just a jerk, because there's no discrepancy. Like, it's that contrast in his voice that makes us lean in Like, oh, he's interesting, but then when we get closer, we're like, oh, I didn't want to get that close to this guy, right? Like it's that kind of uh parallel that I mean, that kind of push and pull in his
Okay.
voice that's makes him really interesting. So yeah, I like that. It's the same thing you're doing with Ruth, where you've got this really strong female lead who demonstrates that strength with her body language all the time, but her words are pulling back. She stammers a little bit. She avoids topics, right? Like, so she has a contrast as well. It's just different than his. Um, they match in some ways and pull apart in others, which is what is going to make them a great pair in the book.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it. I'm going to stop the recording and we can
Okay.
chat a little bit more.